Live, sound check. Emergency and Community Services Committee meeting for Thursday, April 7th, 2022. Sound check.
Are we live? Okay, councillors and staff, we are live. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Emergency Community Services Committee meeting for April 7th, 2022. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting, and members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. Please be advised that I will only time your questions, not the answers that you'll be receiving. Please note that we now have quorum present, and Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have several changes to the agenda. We had one added delegation request, item 6.1 from Garth Brown from Equality, respecting secondary suites for today's meeting. We have two new consent items, item 7.3, Seniors Advisory Committee minutes from March 4th, 2022. And item 7.4, interview subcommittee to the Emergency and Community Services Committee minutes of March 22nd, 2022. We have one new notice of motion, item 12.1, Rapid Housing Initiative eligible shovel-ready locations inventory. Under item 13, we have on the addendum item 13.1, amendments to the outstanding business list. Items considered completed and to be removed. 13.1 AA, Hamilton Youth Engagement Collaboration. This item is being withdrawn as it was taken care of at the last meeting. And then we have one new private and confidential item, item 14.1, appointments to the Seniors Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillors may have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, we will now have a vote in our e-scribe, electronic vote. Or as Councillor Jackson coined it, the e-vote. Yeah. Yes, thumbs up, I can see that. There we go. And that carried 4-0. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Councillors, are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none, those who have noted and disqualifying, oh, I don't need to do that. If during the meeting you uncover the fact that you may have a conflict, then please bring it to our attention at that time. We're moving on to item 4.1 on today's agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting for March 24th, 2022. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of that meeting? Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Any questions, comments, or? And I see none, so we can move to the vote. And if you're having issues with e-scribe, just give me the high sign there. There we go, 4-0. Perfect. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to delegation requests, which is item 6.1. Today we have Mr. Garth Brown from Equality respecting secondary suites. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the delegation request on the floor? Moved by Councillor Paul, seconded by Councillor Nan. We need to approve that before Mr. Brown speaks. So let's go to the vote. No problem. And the vote is up. Sorry, Mr. Brown, technology sometimes is a bit slow. Oh, you're correct. I go to consent items next. I'll come back to you, Mr. Brown. And that vote carried 4-0. Thank you. So we're now moving on to consent items. We have 7.1, which is Fire Apparatus Conference Trade Show case. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report so that we can have it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Nan, and then we'll turn it over to the Chief. Chief, do you want to make a few comments about this? This is kind of cool.
So through the Councillor, Fire Chief Dave Cunliffe. So thank you very much. Just wanted to inform committee that there will be a Hamilton Fire Department vehicle showcased at the upcoming Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs Conference. Last year, we had the opportunity through our apparatus replacement program to replace a number of our senior officer, our platoon chief, district chief, and safety officer vehicles with F-250 pickups. They're frontline response vehicles, and they're really like workhorses when it comes to some of the response. Through a working committee, we outfitted these vehicles to the needs of our frontline workers, and that has been recognized by one of the vendors that we worked with, and they've asked us to be able to showcase our vehicle in their booth for many of the 30,000 potential delegates that are going to come through this conference over the course of the weekend. So it's a great opportunity for the Hamilton Fire Department and certainly for our staff to be showcased for the excellent work that they do, and just wanted committee to be aware of that.
Well done, Chief. I'm proud of that. That's fantastic. Any further comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll put the vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Pauls, go ahead.
I don't know if I missed it. Where is the conference, Chief?
Through the chair to the councillor, it's in Toronto at the International Centre.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll have the vote now, please. The vote is up. And that vote carries 4-0. Thank you very much. Councillors, we now have 3 items that are before us as consent items. 7.2, which is the Seniors Advisory Committee minutes for February 4th. 7.3, which is the Senior Advisory Committee minutes for March 4th. And then we have 7.4, which is the interview subcommittee for the Emergency Community Services minutes. Do you want to move them all at once, or do you need to separate? I'm seeing a thumbs up to moving them all at once. Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder to do that, so I'll accept Councillor Jackson as moving them and Councillor Pauls as seconding it. And so we're now voting on receiving 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4. No problem. We're going so fast, the computers can't keep up, Councillor. And that carried 4-0. Now we're moving on to public hearings and delegations. 9.1, Mr. Garth Brown from Egality. I'd like to call upon Mr. Brown respecting secondary suites. Mr. Brown, if you could turn on your camera and your microphone. Perfect. So we have 5 minutes for you today, sir, so please proceed.
Through you, Councillor, I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with all of you. I want to start with gratitude, thanking both city staff and leadership for moving forward and making aggressive bylaw changes to secondary suite allowances throughout Hamilton. It's a tremendous move forward and gives opportunity to create safe, affordable, and secure housing in every community throughout the greater city. I also need to mention thanks for the proposal of financial incentives tied to the creation of secondary suites. I was going to come to this later, but I think a quick math lesson is helpful here. When we look at what rapid housing initiatives and affordable housing incentives and grants have been moving forward, recently the City of Toronto was given $132 million to create 233 homes, and that works out to over $500,000 per home. Last year, the City of Hamilton received $13 million and created 38 units. That worked out to about $340,000 per home. The real advantage with secondary suites is the cost savings, because secondary suites can be built for less than $100,000, even with 2x4s at $10 a board now. But definitely the cost of building a secondary suite and creating a safe, secure home for a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom family, or even an individual, is a fraction of the price of what we as taxpayers hear daily of funding announcements for affordable housing. So I ask all present to keep that in mind as we move forward purposefully and responsibly to make sure that investments in affordable housing are found in the right path. What's proposed with this strategy for secondary suites speaks to around $35,000 as an incentive per unit that's created over the next 3 years. And as you can tell, that's 10% of what is being spent per unit based on that 13 million that was given earlier. The secondary suite opportunity within the city of Hamilton is very strong because of the new bylaw structure. Your planning department and some people who work at Indwell have calculated that there can be up to 20,000 new homes created as a result of secondary suites. And that additional increase provides in-city growth within our existing communities, fills our schools with students, fills our stores with customers and services and all the rest. So it builds a healthier community, a more vibrant community, and builds, of course, our transit system with more ridership. One of the challenges that I've seen over the past 10 years of building secondary suites, much of that work has been done in Halton Region, where I've worked with the Halton Region Housing Group. When a homeowner or investor came forward with an interest to build a secondary suite, we immediately tied the investor or the homeowner with Halton Housing, and we created an opportunity to make sure that when that secondary suite was completed, a family from the wait list was able to move into that 2 or 3 bedroom unit. That collaboration made the world of difference, because in Halton, as it will be in Hamilton, 80% of the average market rate based on CMHC's data would currently suggest that a 3-bedroom provided under this program would rent out for somewhere around $1,200 a month. And it doesn't take long to jump on a phone and look at Kijiji and see what 3-bedroom apartments are going for in Hamilton. And I'd encourage all present to keep in mind that it's not just the upfront construction fees that will be a great leverage tool to build awareness and more participation in this program, but it's also an opportunity to extend that relationship with the homeowner and to create some sort of a wraparound subsidy as well as outreach supports to that homeowner to make sure that we build ambassadors, if you will, for the secondary suite initiative as it moves forward beyond the first 3 years and into the 4th, 5th, and subsequent years. We can
You have about 30 seconds left, sir.
Okay, so I'll come right to the point, and that is to make sure that we've got a great opportunity here to financially incentivize the construction side of the build. Let's not stop there. Let's take a look and see what we can do with the housing group to bring supports to homeowners who maybe never dreamt of being a landlord, so that they can feel assured that they'll move forward with the support of the city and make sure that the landlord-tenant city housing relationship is built and strengthened in the months and years to come. I thank you very much for this opportunity. And welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Any questions from the councillors? Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Garth, for coming in today. Just a quick question regarding your experiences in Halton. You referenced the partnership and collaboration you had with Halton Housing in order to support families and households on their wait list to get placed into newer SDUs. My question is, in your current example, did homeowners receive supports for those wraparounds, or are they simply just providing housing?
Thank you. Mr. Brown, please.
Through you, Councillor. I show before you here an agreement that I entered into back in 2012 with Halton Region. I had purchased a home in Burlington. I created a secondary suite and in the basement, and the region basically set up a contract for the 3-bedroom on the main floor, the 2-bedroom secondary suite in the basement. And that agreement extended several services between the region and myself as a landlord. Number one, it provided for 2 months vacancy. If ever there was a tenant that left and there was a break before a new tenant would come in, I would get paid rent during that absence. So that was good peace of mind for me. Even though I wasn't getting market rent for that property, I'd be getting paid the vacancy time. On top of that, they provided for any damage considerations that came about. And I might mention, during the 10 years that this property has been in operation, the longest vacancy period between tenants was 2 weeks. Because if we knew a tenant was moving out, we'd go back to the wait list and make sure that we had another family ready to move in. And much like in Hamilton, there's no shortage of demand. There's a huge shortage of supply.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr.
And
Brown. Councillor?
through you, so the only residents were renters that came from the Halton region waitlist.
That is correct. And
Thank you.
again, because of that relationship with the region, I was obliged to keep that tenancy available for waitlist applicants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the other councillors? We're good, Matthew? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown, for your presentation today. I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder to receive the report and refer the report to, what item is it? 10.1. Thank you very much. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson, and we'll have the vote on that. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. You can turn off your camera now. You can log into YouTube to see the rest of the meeting. The motion carried 4-0. Thank you very much. Now moving on to item 10.1. The City of Hamilton strategic plan to create affordable housing supply in the secondary rental market. May I have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Nan. Seconded by Councillor Pauls. Thank you. Mr. John, you have a presentation?
Through the chair to the council, no formal presentation, but I'm happy to give an overview of the proposal. And thankfully to Mr. Brown, he did capture many of the aspects which we're very excited about this strategy, and I do want to give some accolades to staff. This is one of those housekeeping and one of those business as usual items, which thankfully we've been so inundated with emergency response that we've been able to bring forward and get approval of. We do have great belief in this process and the ability to increase supply across the city of Hamilton. We obviously have a very constrained rental market, and the opportunity for secondary suites captures a number of items in our action plan. I may pass it over to my manager, Al Fletcher, for some of the details, but we truly see this as a phased approach. First and foremost, we want to get that supply out there across the city and encourage many homeowners to ultimately become developers and start building this gentle densification of units across the city. They will be of a price point and a rental tenure that is in need of many of our housing individuals, and we will be able to then ultimately add housing allowances and other benefits to travel individuals to take advantage of those locations. In subsequent phases, as Mr. Brown pointed out, we will be looking to actually be more strategic in the locations and the level of subsidy that we provide to make sure that we meet the needs of our ever-evolving housing waitlists, family household compositions, and tenure of affordability. The first phase truly is just to increase supply, but we do believe that once we get to a healthy secondary suite market, we will be able to then be more strategic in the location and geography of those units to add additional affordability requirements and really make some inroads into our housing wait list. And I'll pass it over to Al for some of the details in terms of the financial compensation we'll have in the first phase. It does reflect the construction costs and additional funds should those units be accessible. I was going to say affordable, accessible. So I'm not sure. I may have taken all of Al's thunder, but I do want to showcase Al and the work of his staff because they have been doing incredible work behind the scenes.
Thank you, Mr. John. Mr. Fletcher, please. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Chair Clark. Nice to see you, and thank you, Edward. He captured the majority of it. Just a couple things I will mention. So this is a strategy that's been developed over the last couple of years, and as he mentioned, has been on and off because of our reaction to the pandemic pressures. And I will note that the strategy we're talking about, which is the catalyst funding for secondary dwelling units, is one of several strategies in the report. Many of the others we'd like to go back and, upon approval by council of the strategy, work with our various departments and working groups that we're talking about and look at workload and resources to make sure that we can still implement those in a timely fashion. They're still all valid. From the perspective of the catalyst funding for secondary dwelling units, absolutely right, 2 phases. It will be, we're looking at a $25,000 grant with a possibility of additional 5,000 if it's dealing with accessibility issues. This could be for any units as they relate to a basement unit, a attic unit, a granny flat, a laneway house. So there's a range of housing types that are out there and a range of construction costs as they relate to that. So through phase 1, we are really looking at increasing the supply of units in the market because Hamilton is short on all levels of affordability. And then once we gather the information, we see the costs, the financials of building these various types of units. Through phase 2, that's where we'll move to what Ed had said, looking at how do we incentivize these developments to target certain populations, certain locations within the city. But there will still be secondary dwelling units that will be a supply or increase the supply that is not necessarily affordable housing. For instance, a laneway house, as Mr. Brown spoke to, wouldn't be $100,000. It would be substantially more. So you may be looking at a different rental market. But from the role of sitting in investment in affordable housing, I'll take any unit we can get to increase the supply in Hamilton. So I think that's most of the comments I'd like to make, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Okay, we have a couple of speakers. Councillor Jackson, you're up first, sir. I'm only timing your question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Clark. Appreciate Director John and Special Project Manager Fletcher. Good to see you, Al. It's been a long time. Thank you for your information provided. I'm going to have some difficulty with this item, Chairman Clark, because if I could ask through you to Director John on page 3, on the bullet point at the bottom that says on May 14th, Council approved the bylaws allowing secondary dwelling units with the principal dwelling and 1 detached SDU on a lot containing already a single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling. In other words, that was back last April 28th, I believe the actual council meeting was, when I was one of 2 or 3 members of council that was recorded as opposed to allowing a garage and shed conversions to secondary dwelling units. And because this is tied in, if I could ask through you to Director John, is this part and parcel of moving forward with this strategic plan? Let me get that on the record to start with, Chairman Clark, please, through
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you.
Through the chair to the Thank you. Through the chair to the council. So this will be commensurate to the planning approvals that have taken place. We are looking at taking advantage of the ability to create these secondary suites, and we'll be working within those parameters as we go forward. Much of our initial, as we mentioned, initial push is for the supply, but certainly we will take into account as the planning regime has evolved, the good neighborliness and the issues that may come with secondary suites, we're absolutely very sensitive to those and work closely with our planning partners on that behalf.
So thank you, Director John. It sounds like it is a reaffirmation that it is part and parcel and will continue to be tied in. Chairman Clark, I'm willing to hold my overall speech till later, or I can do a concluding comment or 2 at this time. I'll leave it up to you.
Please proceed.
Okay, thanks, Chairman Clark. I think I'm going to have to be recorded as opposed, Chairman Clark. I've been very supportive over the years, although having some reservations. Many of you have heard my speech in the past about absentee landlords, out-of-town landlords, those that are speculators, investing in many properties in our community. And unfortunately, we couldn't get the stipulation in of owner-occupied, when these investors have bought these properties. If I could have got that stipulation in of owner occupation on the particular property, I think it would have resolved many of the issues, because a greater amount of pride of ownership would have been forthcoming to the everyday homeowner that has lived on their street and in their neighborhood in the single family dwellings, modest single family dwellings for many, many years. But unfortunately, we couldn't get that stipulation in of owner occupation or a good neighbor policy as well. And I was supportive, reluctantly, of allowing conversions within existing homes to 2-unit dwellings. But because of that bullet point on page 3, allowing the secondary dwelling units of garage and shed conversions, basically you could go from a single family living on one particular address property to now 3. To me, over intensification of that particular modest lot, I'm going to have to be recorded as opposed, Mr. Chairman. And a couple of neighborhoods in my community have already expressed their opposition and strong feelings towards the secondary dwelling units of garage and shed conversions that council approved last April by law on May 14th, but I was on the record as recorded as opposed, so I want to stay consistent with that. Thank you, Chairman Clark.
Thank you, Councillor, for your questions and your comments. We're moving on now to Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, a few questions if I could. Again, thank you to staff for this report, and glad to see some movement on some of the usual work Housing Services focuses on in bringing excellence around the portfolio to our municipality in light of all of the emergency management you all have been doing. A couple of clarifying questions. There was in the presentation, Manager, you mentioned phase 2 focusing on strategic locations. In phase 2's work, are you anticipating addressing concerns that have been raised around the over concentration of intensification in certain parts of the city as it relates to affordable housing compared to other parts of the city that folks would love to be able to move to and afford to be able to move to, but where we don't see the same level of rental opportunity?
Fletcher, please.
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. So I think that's part of what phase 1 will help direct in phase 2, because anecdotally we've heard about the interest in this, but we don't actually know what's going to come forward. Mm-hmm. We will ensure that there's compliance with bylaw. So making sure any unit meets bylaw, that it's done by a licensed contractor and building permit, which means safe housing. So I guess we're taking the first phase to be able to determine and direct us for second phase, which may include looking at specific locations that we would support or others that we may not support.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Yep, through you on that question about licensed contractors, which of course we would want to make sure that the units are constructed in a way that is absolutely in adherence with our building codes and bylaw. From a slightly different lens, and perhaps thinking about Councillor Jackson's comments and concerns around accountability of some landlords, do staff anticipate we currently have a rental housing licensing pilot that focuses on wards 1 and 8. Do staff anticipate that suite of bylaw pieces around licensing of landlords would expand as this rolls out?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Fletcher, please.
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. One of the strategies that are targets or strategies that are in this document does include looking at evaluating and working with the other departments on the rental housing bylaw pilot to determine what has happened, what the outcomes are, and working integrated or with each other to figure out what the next steps would be. At this point in time, we don't know what those next steps would be.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you. And supplemental to that one through you, does any of the work moving forward also include consultation with tenant organizations?
Thank you. Mr. Fletcher.
Through the chair to the councillor, there was a lot of consultation done over the past 2 years leading up to this. We would see that as we learn more from this, it creates a great opportunity to do further consultation do some education as well and get additional input. A lot has changed in Hamilton over the last 2 years when consultation was originally done. So we're eager to see what the thoughts are out there.
I appreciate that, but specifically around tenant organizations, because one side of this is the concern and wanting to make sure that we're developing secondary units that are the safest at the best standard of quality, that are both beneficial for the homeowner to consider as a supplementary income, while also being a contributor to reducing wait lists and increasing the supply of rental housing. And then there is the experience that we have heard very clearly as councillors coming to this committee and several other committees by tenants, by renters, about their concerns around the accountability to bylaw and the accountability to property standards, and also concerns around renovictions and et cetera. So we have work coming down the pipe as it relates to our renovictions bylaw regime. And then there is the updated bylaw that has come into play as well, that kind of rounds out and makes deeper some of the safety and dignified housing components. But in terms of the potential and already existing experiences of renters in our municipality who do rent in basement suites, who do rent in secondary units, or who are renting into homes that have multiple units inside of them, there are expressed concerns there that I feel like tie directly into this program. How can we ensure that tenant consultation is part of the formal consultation moving forward?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Fletcher, please.
Through the chair, unless Ed wants to say something different, we'll commit to doing that kind of consultation moving forward. I will note that I did a brief time in licensing as well, and I do recall a lot of complaints coming in that were in regards to units that weren't legal. So as we move forward with this project, we are ensuring the legality of the unit, we're ensuring the building code compliance. So some of those concerns will be dealt with going through that process. In regards to complaints or comments from tenant groups, we will commit to consulting to a broad range of individuals and groups out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor, you have 1 minute, 20 seconds.
Thank you. In the report, there was reference in the financial implications in the, not the PDF attachment, but the cover report, that Housing Services Division is waiting for the Ontario Priority Housing Initiative's funding allocation for 2022 to 2024. As it relates to this initiative. So does that mean that implementation of those $25,000 grants or additional $5,000 grants hinges on the funding coming from that allocation?
Mr. Fletcher, please.
Through the chair to the councillor, you are correct. Okay. We have the allocation for OFI, or Ontario Priority Housing Initiatives, of about $3.3 million. Our staff intent currently is to dedicate $1 million to Ontario Renovates, which includes both the secondary dwelling unit catalyst funding, as well as supporting those eligible residents for major improvements to homes or emergency improvements. That is our intent. We're waiting for the implementing regulations, which we still have not received. We are told that they are imminent. I'm not sure what that means, but that is our intent moving forward. And we do have the approved allocation of funding for the 2022-2023 timelines.
Okay,
thank you,
excellent.
sir. Councillor?
So we have the money in place to initiate and subsequent funding for subsequent expansion of the program. I think that was the extent of my questions. Right, the defining of the supports came earlier, and that was currently in the form of grants to enable the construction. Are there any allocations or thoughts towards the point that was raised by the delegate regarding further wraparound supports for individuals? And does staff see the same kind of alignment that was discussed by the delegate regarding households on the wait list being assigned to SDUs via formal agreements with the municipality? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fletcher?
Yes, through the chair to the councillor. So two parts to that. One, we don't know who will be coming forward on what type of units and what type of rental they will be looking for. So as we understand that better, we can look at that. We are working in conjunction with the other sections within housing. So if there's opportunities, we can build some of that in. We would welcome the opportunity. Where I would see that probably more targeted would be when we move into phase two. So once we have an understanding of the interests, the types of units, the affordability range of proponents coming forward, then we'll be better understand who would be best suited for those units, where does it fit within affordability, how does it work with rent supplements and wraparound services. And I'll just note one thing, the money that we are talking about is it's 25,000 plus potentially 5,000 for accessible. We do this as a payback of invoices done. So the work is completed and then we pay them back the money. So we're not front ending money that doesn't get spent or doesn't get implemented as part of the program. So it's really a payback through grant funding. And I think Ed has something to add.
Mr. John, please.
Thank you, through the chair to the council, and I think Al captured a lot of that. What I will say is in that first phase, we will be looking at opportunities to add housing allowances and rent subsidies to these units. So right now, that's an opportunity for existing individuals on the housing waitlist to take advantage of those flexible housing allowances. So we will look at those units, match them up, and hopefully have a supply that actually meets more need in the community. So that would be in the initial phase. And as Al mentioned, as we go into subsequent phases, we'll be a little bit more precise, both with the amount of funding, where we fund, and what household compositions we're able to secure at a better rental market. And we'll be able to add on layers such as time of affordability and other matters to make sure we have that relationship.
Thank you. So if I heard that correctly, if I could through you, Chair, so the grant payback program will be a formal agreement between the homeowner and the municipality in order to access the grant, and that there is a potential in phase two that that grant agreement could include access to other supports for the landowner, or would that be tied to the tenant? Thank you.
Mr. John.
Through the chair to the councillor. So we would look towards increasing that agreement with the landlord to capture individuals from the waitlist. And we would work out a way of working with housing providers or other means to make sure that we are taking from a waitlist and providing the supports necessary. Right now, there's a number of opportunities we can see, and hopefully we'll have a supply to make us allow us to take full advantage of that. But that's the intent going forward.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all the clarity on the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Nan, please, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, Councillor.
You meant Councillor Pauls.
Oh, sorry. Oh, my gosh.
Councillor Pauls, but it's okay. Thank you. It's always a good day when we could add some housing to our shortage that we have here in Hamilton. But my concern is this, and I concur with Councillor Jackson. I've had quite a few people calling me, and the main concern I have, because I forgot to ask the delegate if there were any negative results from the second suite strategy. And he did mention something about if the house is damaged, we will look after it. If there's a vacancy, and we will look after it. But my main concern is the parking. I had a street, very small street, narrow. I think it was only about 200, and there were 3 homes being turned into multiple suites, the basement. And one of them was rejected. They went to LPAC and they won. And the reason is no parking, you can't use the driveway. So I'm wondering, how do we put that in place in certain neighborhoods that these suites cannot be allowed because of parking issue? Is there any strategy in that sense?
Through the
Thank you,
chair.
Councillor Pauls. Mr. John, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I keep jumping in. Through the chair to the council, I'll put my planning hat on. But we are working very closely with our planning colleagues, and they are responsible for determining the regulations that go with these permissions. So we will work with that. In addition to that, I will say that through all these phases, we will have this opportunity to actually deal with the landlords through an education process as to what it means to become a landlord. These may be households that have previously never intended to become landlords, and so there is a learning curve that we will have that opportunity. Unlike a lot of unknown secondary suites, whether they be illegal or otherwise, we'll actually get at the initial opportunity a large discussion going back to renovictions, expectations, making sure people are aware of the Residential Tenancy Act as they enter into this, because that is a key piece to it, as well as property standards. You know, this is a change for normal households. They are now becoming a developer and a landlord at the same time. So we want to make sure we have a very frank and transparent discussion as to those expectations as we go through and roll out this process.
My question, thank you. My question, what about parking? You get a family on 11,000 square foot home, the street is small, and they're going to rent the basement and rent 2 more rooms up on the stair, and they all have cars. Where will they park?
So through the chair to the council. So that is a planning regulation determined through the planning process. Nothing within this program or approach will affect parking requirements or regulations. We are working within the confines, making sure that whoever receives that grant is in full conformity with those rules and regulations.
So they will have to follow the rules, make sure. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but like I said, I've had a couple of calls, like Councillor Jackson said he has, and people are, they like their neighborhood. They like it to be the small, nice neighborhood that they've stayed, and they've seen people buying these homes and turning them into multi-use, and the landlord's not there. And I agree, we're going to have a licensing landlord pilot where we charged people, but I think we really have to take a closer look, because sometimes when we do that, the landlord will put the cost of the licensing to their rent. So, there's so much to look into it. But like I said, it sounds great. I will support it, but I want to make sure they're in the right location and everything is looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nan, could you take the chair for a moment, please? Thank you.
Certainly.
So I don't have any questions for staff. I just have a few comments. So it was back in 2007. Many of us will remember Premier Dalton McGuinty. He came forward with as of right secondary suites in legislation, which does not give municipalities the option to say, we don't want secondary suites in our city. We don't have that option. What we have is a right of every single family homeowner to have a secondary suite in their home. How we govern that is the question. And Mr. John and Mr. Fletcher are very clear that as we move forward, we have to ensure that the planning regulations are in place that answer some of the questions that my colleagues have around this table. A secondary suite, to my knowledge, is not a 3-plex or 4-plex. A secondary suite is just that, and it's described in the legislation. So some property owners who are trying to push 3-plexes and 4-plexes and 5-plexes into one home, it doesn't work that way. The other thing that I'm noticing, and I suspect that is as a result of the increase in housing prices, I have, in my ward, I have a 25% increase in population because of new people coming into new developments. Many folks, and I don't have numbers, but it's from my experience when I'm doing my community outreach and knocking on doors, many homes in my ward have much more than one family. They no longer have just the, we were taught in high school, the nuclear family. They now have an extended family. So they have grandmothers and grandfathers, they have aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews. And I have homes where residents object. There's 10, 12, 13 people living in that house. It's as a result of the economy, and it's as a result of the housing prices that we're seeing that. I don't see anything in the legislation that prevents that from happening, because under numerous decisions through the Human Rights Board and through the courts, the definition of a family is very broad. Anyone that if a number of people choose to live together as a cohesive unit, they are identified as a family. And if we do anything to impinge on their rights as a family, they can go to the Human Rights Board and we will have challenges. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. I understand Councillor Jackson's concerns and Councillor Nan's concerns, most certainly. But the reality is the decision was made at Queen's Park back in 2007. Many other municipalities are ahead of us and have already done this, i.e. Halton. We heard Mr. Brown today. We are now catching up. And it is going to make change. And parking is issues, but we need to deal with that strongly in regulation. We have the right as a municipality. And so we need to come up with regulations that maintains the character of the neighborhood, because at the end of the day, it's just one addition to the house or an apartment in the basement, whatever the case is. So I don't see secondary units going away. I see secondary units becoming much more common. I see senior citizens, our elderly who are now on fixed incomes, and they simply can't afford to keep their home the way it is, and so they need assistance. And so the option of renting out the basement to one tenant to help them maintain their taxes or whatever their costs are to live in that home so they don't have to move into a long-term care home or into an apartment, it is a viable option. And the onus is on the municipality to ensure that we have the proper regulations in place. I expect, as Mr. Fletcher and Mr. John has indicated, that this is going to take, while it may take a bit of time to get implemented right, it is going to relieve some of the housing pressures that we have in our community. But we need to ensure that when we put bylaws in place, the onus is on us to ensure that those bylaws are enforced. When we put regulations in place, the onus is on us to make sure that those regulations are enforced. To do less than that is disrespectful to the neighbors living in those communities, in my humble opinion. So I'm going to support the motion, the report. I think as we move forward, if we collectively, with our staff, with community leaders, put our minds to the regulations to ensure the enforcement of the rules, we will fix this problem. Because I can tell you, having secondary suites being, having property owners going to the Committee of Adjustment to enable them to do a secondary suite, and it's rejected by the Committee of Adjustment, and it goes to the Ontario Lands Tribunal, and they approve it, all we're doing is increasing the costs to the resident and the municipality. So we need to fix that disconnect and ensure that everybody is on the same page, and we've got the regulations in place that makes everyone comfortable in terms of how secondary dwelling units will not only be implemented, but will be monitored and governed. With that, Councillor Nan, I'll take the chair back. Thank you for the latitude. And second time speakers I have on the list is Councillor Nan.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, thank you for clarifying the policy piece there with the provincial government. Absolutely, we as a municipality need to focus on ensuring the safest, most dignified and most appropriate way by which the municipality can help families and households opt into secondary dwelling unit provision in our city. I've benefited personally from similar policies in place in different provinces and different cities where I lived as a student, going to university and college. Most of my college and university life was spent living in basement suites in the Lower Mainland. As a Gen Xer, uh, happily in the sandwich generation now, part of moving to Hamilton was my family's ability to ensure that we could care for my mother-in-law and now my mother, and maintain our ability to have aging in place and care provision and community and culturally appropriate care for our loved ones as they age. And my story is not different than many other Hamiltonians. And there are, sure, some folks in the community that are concerned about parking. There are some people who are really, really invested in maintaining the status quo of their quality of life. And I can appreciate that. However, we're also facing an extreme housing affordability crisis. And you all and I know just how much housing has skyrocketed and become completely inaccessible to not only students, now entire households, where we are seeing unprecedented numbers as it relates to those who have no other option but to sleep on the streets. We're seeing our shelter system being expanded over capacity over and over again, and many, many households saying, we just don't know where else we can go. We're getting priced out of the market here in Hamilton. These communities and these neighborhoods are our home. We don't want to have to leave here, but we have no other option. We're getting completely priced out. This suite of policies and the work that staff have brought forward and the recommendation that's here has the ability to not only increase affordable supply, it does so in a way that, as the delegate mentioned, is more of a cost-effective route. $350,000 a unit and escalating to have our not-for-profit social housing providers build brand new units. The cost return on investment of having a $25,000 investment to convert a basement or convert an attic or convert a garage into a safe, dignified, and legislatively guided dwelling is part of the spectrum of housing solutions that this municipality needs to lever. We have to pull every municipal lever that is in our suite as a municipality to help address this crisis that we're facing. And it would be my hope, and I would implore any resident in the community who feels steadfast against such a policy to please continue opening your hearts and have compassion. It doesn't require you as an individual homeowner to make this change, but it also invites you to get out of the way and let other neighbors be part of the solution. And I think at this point, given the journey we've all experienced over the last couple of years in this pandemic, we all have a role to play, and most importantly, not to get in the way of those residents and those homeowners who want to play that role. The pieces that have been appropriately raised around concerns around accountability to landlords, and especially those that are absentee and those that continue to leverage themselves in the housing market to make profit, 150%. However, we need to increase our regulatory regime. However, we need to more bolster our bylaw regime in order to ensure that accountability and enforcement. That's where we need to be focusing our lens right now, so that those homeowners can be held accountable and those absentee landlords can be held accountable, so our neighborhoods remain safe, our neighborhoods remain being part of the complete picture of communities that are livable and can continue fostering places where children can play and grow, and our seniors can age with dignity. Thank you. Happy to support the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Second time speaker, Councillor Jackson, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a wrap-up comment. I very much appreciate the factual historical context, Chairman Clark, you provided back in 2007 with the provincial direction of conversions of single-family homes to allow for a secondary unit within the particular single-family home structure. Provincial edict, provincial direction to municipalities, absolutely. However, I do want to make it crystal clear for public consumption that last April 28th at City Council and the final bylaw on May 14th to allow the shed and garage conversions was a planning staff report with recommendation that came back to Council and council did have the ability to say yay or nay to it. And I was one of the ones who took the opportunity to say nay to it because I felt there were issues that would provide over intensification on a single family lot and further alter the traditional character of wonderful, modest single family neighborhoods. So I just want to make that clear that provincial direction absolutely to municipalities 15 years ago. But last April, council had the ability to say yay or nay to the conversion of sheds and garages. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nan, if you can take the chair just for a second. I'm wondering if it would give more comfort to councillors if we added in item C that directed staff to work with the planning staff to ensure public education around the regulations and enforcement of the regulations, something to that effect. I think what we need to do is ensure that as we're moving forward here, we're working lockstep with planning to ensure that the regulations are tight, they're enforceable. And by that, I mean that we would win if there was an appeal, and that it is being respectful of the neighbors as we move forward with respect to parking and things along that line. I'll leave that open-ended between now and council if any councillor wants to suggest that type of amendment. I know that planning staff is going to have to work with, they're the ones that are going to have to regulate it. They're the ones, you know, it's municipal law enforcement and planning. They're the ones that are going to be the enforcers, if you will. But we need to ensure that through this program that prospective landlords understand that there are limitations. And I leave it to my council colleagues. I don't want to force an amendment here, but I'll leave it to my colleagues. It's something that we should contemplate between now and council. And with that, I'll take the chair back. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, then we'll have the vote. Thank you. And the vote carries on a divided vote, 3 in favor and 1 is opposed. Thank you. We're now moving on to, yes, thank you. So Councillor Nan, if you can take the chair and I can present my motion.
Certainly. Councillor Clark, go ahead.
Thank you. I need to put my glasses on. Give me 2 seconds. So this is a shelter system complaint resolution process. It will be moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Nan. Whereas since the onset of COVID-19, there's been a rapid expansion of the emergency shelter system, which has created many changes and ongoing challenges for service providers and clients. Whereas to better support the emergency shelter system in achieving outcomes, continuous improvement processes should be in place to learn from the pandemic response and look for opportunities for improvements. Whereas opportunities for improvement should be identified in a person-centered way that accounts for individual experiences of those in the emergency shelter. Whereas there are many avenues in which complaints, concerns, or questions can be received by city staff about services and care provided in the emergency system. And whereas developing a formal complaint process for residential care facilities has been successful in receiving and responding to complaints, concerns, or questions about the services and care that are provided to residents of these locations. Therefore, be it resolved. Item A, that staff be directed to formalize a process within the Healthy and Safe Communities Department to receive complaints, concerns, questions about the service and care provided to clients within the Hamilton Emergency Shelter System. And B, that when the complainant feels the issue has not been satisfactorily resolved through working directly with the service provider, that the process allows for complaints, concerns, or questions from clients of the shelter system and anyone acting on behalf of a client, including peers, advocates, friends, and family members of the clients. And so, councillors, All of you may recall we moved motions, I moved a motion and you supported it, to create a residential care facility liaison. And that liaison receives complaints from residents who are living in residential care facilities or from their families or from their friends, lawyers, advocates, etc. That system has been successful. And we should be proud of that, because what we enabled is an improvement to the residential care facility program. Listening and hearing the anecdotal stories from homeless and unhoused individuals and unhoused families, we need to stress that it's no longer just simply individuals. We're seeing a significant increase in families who are finding themselves, through no fault of their own, without a place to stay. Hearing the concerns, I had some discussions with Mr. John, with Ms. Burden and staff, and some advocates in the community. And we need to find a way to improve the shelter system. And if we don't know what's actually going on in the shelter system, then we can't improve it. And so this motion is hopefully opening the doors so that the liaison officer will have an opportunity to go to the shelter if there's an issue, speak with management, speak with the client, and try to find resolution. I have been having discussions with staff about moving forward with some form of an inspection process for our emergency shelters also. We received $23 million from the province for homeless programs. We spend an awful lot of money on emergency shelters, hotels and emergency spaces, transitional housing. We need to hold them accountable for the services that they're providing to the clients in our community. We need to hold them accountable for the services that they're providing to residents and families. And if we don't know what's going on in those facilities, then it's hard for us to improve the system. So in my mind, this motion is a stepping stone. It opens the door so that we can start to get real stories from residents, track those, and as a result of the tracking of those, moving forward with a system whereby there would be random inspections of transitional housing, emergency housing, and shelters. It has been disheartening. It has been incredibly emotionally challenging to hear the stories of residents in our community who show up at an emergency shelter and all they have is this box of belongings, which they were allowed to take from their apartment when they were thrown out. But they're not allowed to bring the box of belongings into the shelter. Other residents have been evicted from their home and they have a small dog. And the dog is in their carry-on bag or walking beside them. And they go to the shelter and the shelter says, well, yes, you can come in, but your dog can't. And then they're faced with the challenge of what do they do with the dog? And so if they can't go in the home without the dog, then they go back on the street. It's challenging when you hear stories about bed bugs in the facilities, when you hear concerns about alleged abuse and alleged violence and alleged crime. And I use the term alleged very purposely because we don't know. We need to be able to verify what's going on. In my mind, if we can improve the shelter system, then it will be actually helping folks who are really finding themselves very vulnerable and needing that type of assistance. And so this motion, it's not meant to be controversial. It's meant to ensure that that same process that we adopted for the residential care liaison position, that person will now also be able to hear complaints about shelters, that person will also be able to hear complaints from their family members about shelters, or their lawyer or a resident or whomever is concerned about that situation, and they can weed out whether or not it's an anecdotal story that has no basis in fact, but they're going to be visiting the shelter, talking to the operators, and ensuring that what the resident is telling them, if it is true, they're fixing it. Because ultimately, the taxpayers are paying for those shelters. So those are all my comments, Chair Nan. I'm happy to take any questions. I know Mr. John and Ms. Burton are also happy to take any questions, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for the latitude.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for the motion. Colleagues, Councillor Jackson or Councillor Pauls, do you have any questions? No? Okay, so I do. So I'll pass the chair on to Councillor Jackson.
Okay, Councillor Nan, proceed.
Thank you. Through you, couldn't agree more about the need to better understand barriers residents are facing in the shelter system in Hamilton that goes beyond the anecdotal, but also enables us to have the evidence that is data-driven, which I know that our staff rely on and prefer to operate with, that helps us as a municipality, I would like to see shape operational changes in the shelter system so that it is most inclusive and most accessible to those residents already facing housing crises that lead them to the doors of shelters across the city. So through you, the question is to staff, what would reporting look like if this motion were to pass and be ratified by council?
Who on staff is available? Please, Director Edward John, please.
Through the chair to the councillor, and you're absolutely right. Data collection will be part of this process. We see it as a resolution process as well as a continuous improvement process, and one in many stepping stones towards a number of work plan criteria we have going forward with respect to our contracts with shelters, with service restrictions and others. So we will be able to, similar to the RCF liaison, come back with the amount, how they were resolved. The actual process is somewhat different with RCFs to the shelters. We are likely to anticipate a greater number of complaints and concerns coming forward. So we will look at how to resource that. But certainly as we go, we will continue to monitor the data we receive and able to respond through this committee to council on that resolution process and its formalization. So happy to work with this motion and the continued work efforts of our team to have that continuous improvement embedded in all that we do.
Thank you. Through you, when the RCF liaison position was created, I think we saw originally quarterly reporting and then eventually that kind of coming down to a less frequency. So from staff's perspective, just wanting to get a sense of expectations and clarity, annual reporting on something like this?
Housing Director?
Through the chair to the councillor, certainly from the outset, we would commit to annually. We will monitor. Like I said, we're unaware in terms of the scale and the process. We will build that and respond. But absolutely, if it needs to be more often, we will come back to that, as well as continue to inform on the other processes that we have underway and embark on as we go to this continuous improvement model.
Excellent. Thank you. Those clarifying questions. Taking back the chair, Councillor Pauls.
Yes, I was wondering, if a shelter has a policy of, let's say, no dogs allowed, can the city impose a new policy and say you must accept dogs?
Through the chair to the councillor, legislatively, we will look at that. We will have to take into account union issues, health and safety issues, capacities to acquire pets, and all those different matters. So we use tables we have already with stakeholders and agencies to raise those components, and we will come back with recommendations and suggestions as we see fit following some of those. Some of the other barriers too we're hearing about, which will be part of our transition report, is couples. We often hear about the barrier to access of shelter for those within a couple. So we continue to look at that. And once again, we will build this in kind of two parts. One will be the transition as we wind down the emergency measures and what we really have learned from the pandemic and what have been those barriers to access. And then what we ultimately can do and work with our agencies who will provide shelter is to improve and mitigate as many barriers as possible. You know, we share the common mandate with our shelters. They certainly have been incredible throughout the pandemic in providing those shelter services. And I would be remiss not to mention that we have expanded at an exponential rate. And absolutely, whenever a system doubles in size, you are going to have concerns and issues. And I think this is really a recognition that as we look at this, we are looking at the ability of the system, but as well as the ability to accommodate the individual as best we can. And we continue to work towards that goal.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Right. No further. Oh, Councillor Clark, second time.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I'm not advocating that the shelters take the dogs. This motion is creating a liaison position that will help to resolve those issues. And so if the shelter cannot take the dog, then the liaison would assist and say, okay, we've got this particular veterinarian who's willing to take the dog for a few days or whatever the case is. It's as Mr. John said, it's trying to work together as a community to resolve these impediments where people are choosing to live on the street rather than going to a shelter at night. And I think that's the issue. And I think that's why it's prudent that rather than going to a dogmatic approach with inspections and you will do this, we work with the shelters, we work with the advocates, we work with people who are experiencing the plight of homelessness to find solutions. You know, we talk an awful lot about unhoused people who have higher acuities. They may have mental health issues, they may have addiction or substance abuse issues. We need to find those solutions so that if the person is addicted to medication and they're trying to get off of it and they're taking the methadone, that the shelter understands that. And whether there's a nurse at the shelter that will assist them or whether or not we have a doctor that will assist them, we find that solution. And that's what the liaison has done in the residential care facility. So it's not about, and I hope no one assumed that I was saying, oh, you should be able to take your giant pit bull with you to a shelter. No, that's not the case. It's challenging, though, for someone who is homeless in our community to find a place to put the dog. And they see the dog almost like it's a member of the family. It's like their son, their daughter. This is the one animal that is giving them unconditional love through it all. And if they don't know where the dogs are going to go, then they're going to say no to the shelter. So it's finding those solutions. And that's why I think the liaison will assist us in that regard. And as Mr. John has said, as we move forward, we can make systemic improvements to the shelter system so that hopefully one day we won't have people living on the street. And so I encourage my colleagues to support this motion. It's, as I said, one stepping stone. If you want to call it a pilot, it's a pilot. But at the end of the day, it's something that is, I think, enabling the community to move forward, and we're trying to assist as many people as possible. Those are all my comments, Chair Nan. If you could call the vote, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Seeing no further speakers, it's duly moved and seconded, and before committee for electronic vote. And the motion carries 4-0 unanimously at this committee, and I turn the chair back to you.
Not so fast, Councillor. The next item is a notice of motion. Councillor Marula is not here at the moment. and he has agreed to have me move the notice of motion and present the motion that is before us.
Okay, so you intend to waive the rules?
That is correct. So the first motion would be to waive the rules, and I seek a seconder to Councillor Jackson. Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
And I assume the waiving of the rules is that the Rapid Housing Initiative funding is urgent, the next round?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded and the vote's before you.
Just waiting for you, Councillor.
I already voted.
Our system's just like me.
And that carries 4-0, so go ahead and proceed with the motion.
Thank you. And I want to stress that I am moving this on behalf of Councillor Marula. It is seconded by Councillor Jackson. Whereas the City of Hamilton, through City Housing Hamilton, has received tens of millions of dollars through the federal government Rapid Housing Initiative program to construct new affordable housing units. Whereas current projects benefiting from the Rapid Housing Initiative funding will in part assist in securing homes for houseless individuals. Whereas Hamilton has a housing first mandate, whereas there are tight timelines associated with the application process for residential housing initiative funding, and whereas there is the possibility that a third round of residential housing initiative funding may be made available for municipal service providers. Therefore, be it resolved that Housing Services staff, in consultation with City Housing Hamilton, prepare a list of Rapid Housing Initiative eligible shovel-ready locations for a possible third round of RHI funding, and that the Rapid Housing Initiative eligible shovel-ready locations be presented to the Emergency Community Service Committee for consideration. The motion really speaks for itself, and I'm really grateful that Councillor Marula found out that there was likely this third round, and this enables us to get to the front of the line, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Any colleagues have questions or comments? Seeing none, then Councillor Jackson, if you could also take the chair again.
Floor is yours, Councillor.
Thank you. Through you to staff, the potential of this third round of RHI, I was at St. Joe's earlier today and watched the 24-hour news cycle and saw that the federal government has announced a increased $2.3 billion national housing fund, and that there's potential that these dollars might move quickly. So just wanted to clarify, our staff hearing, whether it's through Director Stahl or Director John or GM Burden, are we anticipating the RHI dollars are specific for municipal service providers of housing, or is it open to not-for-profit social housing providers? Thank you.
General Manager Burden, Housing Director John, who would like to take that, please?
I'm happy to take it. So through the chair to the councillor, I'm assuming the RHI, the Rapid Housing Initiative, would be delivered to municipalities similar to previous occasions. So we've had one and almost 1.8 of RHI, and it is two streams, one being a lump sum provided to the municipalities, to which we then determine where we should allocate those based on shovel-ready applications. And those aren't limited to any one housing provider, but are open to all housing providers who are non-for-profits. So we would essentially determine, if it is to be the same guidelines as previous, where they should go. Bang for the buck would be the cost piece to it, as well as the timing. And I think this motion speaks to that shovel ready. And I think that's been part of our push since we received even the first round of RHI funding, is getting our housing providers to really think about progressing all applications they may have to a point where they are shovel ready. So, you know, it's good news, hopefully, that we receive another batch of RHI, and we will take that allocated fund and then determine which projects, based on a number of criteria which we address, predominantly those being the timing, because previous funding envelopes have been only 1 year turnaround. And in the world of planning, 1 year is a very small period of time. So we have to really determine to make sure we deliver on those timelines. That being said, I haven't heard of any changing guidelines. There's been a lot of municipal advocacy in terms of trying to improve it. We here in Hamilton have benefited quite substantially. We've demonstrated great fiscal prudence in terms of dollar per door and getting those units delivered, and we'll continue to do that. Timing is a constraint that we have mentioned is limited some of the projects that we are able to evaluate. But once again, we've not had any confirmation of a second round or any allocation. So when that comes through, we'd be the first to bring that report forward to highlight any changes and obviously the allocated amounts.
Thank you. Through you, Directors, John, then this motion speaks specific to City Housing Hamilton, and of course, as a board member, fully in favor. However, we as a municipality, and specifically as a council, have endorsed the Housing is Home coalition that is our municipal not-for-profit social housing providers across the city, who also benefit from the RHI stream, either applying as individual organizations or through the municipality. Does this motion limit that work from being pursued, and would it make more sense to open it up to include City Housing Hamilton as well as other not-for-profit not-for-profit social housing providers? Just to be consistent with the guidelines and the mechanisms by which we already do this work.
Through the chair to the council, I'm happy to speak about the intent of the motion with the mover. In my opinion, we have a list of projects that we continually monitor as to their readiness to go forward. And so we can provide that whichever means necessary. We can either take out projects that are not within City Housing Hamilton or provide the list that we have. I would suggest that shovel readiness is a difficult threshold to meet. And so, we do not have an extensive amount of potential applications that meet that very highest caliber of being ready to pull a permit. But we do have a long list. And as you mentioned, Hamilton is Home Coalition have been working very ardently with planners and so forth to build that capacity through a number of projects. And City Housing Hamilton are part of that coalition.
That's right. Okay. Then to you, Chair, given that information, perhaps by council might make sense to open up the language so that it is within the kind of existing practices for housing services, and the fact that we do have an existing list of projects that housing services works with of Hamilton is Home Coalition, which City Housing Hamilton is a member of. So do you recommend that change occur at the committee now with that clarity, or just looking for your procedural guidance if I should bring that to council instead?
Director John, what's your preference to help the councillor with a very legitimate question?
Through the chair to the council, I'm agnostic to be fair. I'm at the will of committee and council as to how I prepare that list. Like I say, it is not going to be an exhaustive list because of that shovel ready requirement. So either way, I'm happy to oblige.
Okay, councillor.
So then in that case, I would want to make sure that we're taking advantage as an entire municipality of the potential third round of funding and propose an amendment to reflect that. So in consultation with the Hamilton is Home Coalition, of which City Housing Hamilton is a member of, and prepare a list of rapid housing initiatives in A. That would be the proposed amendment.
And is there then a seconder for that amendment?
I would look for one.
Councillor Pauls, get it on the floor. Thank you. Any further comments then or questions?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Clark.
I think the amendment is in keeping with the spirit of the motion, but Councillor Marullo is not here to provide his comments, but naturally he can speak to it at council. Thank you.
Okay. So then let's see how the vote goes with the amendment. If it passes, great. He can speak to it then. If it doesn't, then we can still have a further debate if resurrecting it at council next week. Moved and seconded by Councillor Nance, seconded by Councillor Pauls. The amendment on A, all in favor, any opposed? E-vote, please. Elsie Bates. And the outcome of that e-vote, 4-0 in favor. Okay, now the chair back.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I appreciate that. Are there any notices of motion from anyone? Nope. What are we doing?
Can I just clarify procedurally, we amended the motion. Now do
Yep.
we need to approve the motion as amended?
Correct.
You're correct. I leave the chair back.
That's why I gave the chair back to the vice chair to take it from
I've been
there.
learning quickly on these procedural matters, Councillor Jackson. Thank you. The motion as amended, please. And when it's such a small, intimate committee like this one, passing the chair back and forth. And that passes 4-0. Thank you. I turn the chair back to you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Councillor. Excellent job. Now we're at notices of motion, correct, Madam Clerk? Are there any? Yes, so does anyone else have a notice of motion for committee? Seeing none, we're now moving on to the private and confidential. Members, do you wish to move into closed session to discuss item 14.1, which is appointments to the Seniors Advisory Committee? I'm seeing no one asking. Councillor Pauls, are you wanting to go in camera?
We don't need to go in camera, but I would like to ask to waive the rules.
Yep, I will come to you in a second.
Okay.
Councillor Jackson or Councillor Nand, I can't get names straight. I'm losing it. I'm good. Do y'all want to go in camera? Y'all laughing at me? No, okay. Now, Councillor Pauls, I understand you'd like to waive the rules.
Yes, I would. So we could vote on that, please.
Councillor Jackson, are you willing to second the motion to waive the rules? I'm getting a thumbs up on that, Madam Clerk.
Okay.
Any discussion on waiving the rules? Seeing none, and it's a 2/3 vote, which with 3 of us, it should be easy.
Okay. So I'll just ask that the recommendation.
Hang on, we haven't got the vote results yet, so make sure you vote.
I did.
Our computers are, Councillor Pauls, did you vote?
Yes,
I'm
I
taking
did.
it as a yes.
Yeah.
Our computer here is a bit slow, so bear with us. And that's 4 in favor and no one opposed. Now, correct? Thank you. And now, Councillor Pauls, you may read your motion.
I will. Thank you. That the recommendation respecting appointments to the Senior Advisory Committee be approved and released publicly following the approval of council. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson. You're seconding the motion. Thank you. Any comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. Vote is up. And that carries 4-0. And we have one more very important item that we must do today. We need a mover and a seconder to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Thank you, councillors, for your support, and thank you for bearing with my stammering today.
Thank you for the great job, and we're only 4, but we're mighty.
That's right.